Hi guys, welcome back. This week we're going to tackle the interesting processes of evolution. Doesn't it sometimes feel like the creatures we're encountering out in nature, they look the same from generation to generation? But that's not the case. That's an illusion. Evolution is always in motion and is continuously changing species and sometimes even giving rise to new ones. It's like the branches of a tree coming off a sturdy tree trunk. And besides that, what we've already learned is the genetic code that is pretty much the same in all species, which tells us there is a common origin that we all have. Evolution, the evolutionary process, also tells us that. And that's how evolution works. It's an ongoing process. Species always change, even if we don't notice it from day to day. It's how new species emerge. It's like branches growing off a sturdy tree trunk. And all life ultimately connect to a common ancestor. So evolution is really the unifying theory that helps scientists understand and see how everything fits together. And experiments keep confirming that theory over and over again. And it really gives us a template of how species adapt to ever-changing environments. So let's dig into the nuts and bolts and see how traits can morph across generations and how new species can pop up. We'll answer some big questions biologists have been able to answer over time about evolution. Think about evolution like it's a big remodeling job, and species slowly, gradually change and adapt to the environment that's changing as well. The evolutionary theory gives us a blueprint that shows us how the species can change over time. People were debating if species can change over time long before our grandfather of evolution, Charles Darwin. Even back to the ancient Greeks, Plato thought species were stagnant, and that was the prevailing thought at the time. But other people were thinking about gradual changes in species, so they were debating it back then as well. Now, fast forward to the 18th century, and then we got a few names that come up. We got us George Louis Leclerc, we got us Comte de Buffon, and we even got Darwin's grandpa, Erasmus Darwin. I got to read those names, they're complicated. And they were definitely tossing around thoughts of evolution. And what was thought at that time is that we already knew that some species die out. So at that time, scientists recognized that some species go extinct. Meanwhile, James Hutton, our geology guru in this group of scientists, he was from Scotland, and he proposed that the Earth was changing gradually over time by small daily increments, and not what was prevailing at the thought by an epic, sudden cataclysmic event. But since his ideas clashed with the sort of giant disaster-shaped planet theory, it took another person, his name was George Lyell, and he popularized these daily change, incremental change thoughts in the 19th century. And then guess what? He became a pal of Charles Darwin, our grandfather of evolution. And for Darwin, very important was the thought that the Earth had been around way longer than the folks were realizing at the time. And so he could then think and have this aha moment that the species, that gives them more time to evolve and to slowly morph over time. And it's not sort of more of an abrupt process to have the species develop to what they are at the time or today. And then we got to also talk about Jean-Baptiste Lamarck. What a beautiful name, huh? These French people. He was a French thinker. And he also was in the early 19th century, and he proposed the inheritance of acquired characteristics. And in plain language, what does that mean? Is that individual critters, they change during a lifetime. So, for example, if somebody climbs all the time, their muscles become bigger. And then those traits will be passed on to the offsprings. Now, of course, we know at this point it's not quite the way it works, but it certainly paved the way to our thinking and helped that process along. Because that's really also the point. Like this thing of evolution is like, yeah, we give Charles Darwin the credit, but it's really a lot of scientists that he was stepping on and continuing the thought to the time when then he got to that thought. And actually, it wasn't just Charles Darwin; it was also Alfred Russel Wallace that did the same thing. And what they really did is they took the theory and they took observations that they made during their voyages. They both have 2 long voyages during which they could make a lot of observations. Darwin traveled to South America, Australia, and Southern Africa during, what was the time frame, 1831 to 1836. So that's about 5 years. And you got to imagine Darwin apparently was a very stomach sickly man. So traveling on a ship for that long, I'm sure he was not the happiest guy at that time. And so he's got some guts to do that. I don't know if I would have had that. And then Wallace explored the Amazon and the Malay archipelago from, 1848, a little bit later. But you can imagine these epic journeys, no GPS, no cell phone, nothing, just the stars to navigate and the sick stomach. Oof, I'm glad that wasn't me. When Darwin set foot on the Galapagos Islands, he noticed something fascinating. The birds on different islands looked related, but came with a unique twist. It was like these finches had given a custom order beak for the local seed buffet. Darwin realized that maybe all these island finches came from one original mainland species and then diversified. He famously wrote, paraphrasing here with my own commentary, seeing all these beak variations in one close-knit group of birds makes you wonder if just a few birds arrived first and then adapted to all these different island conditions over time. In the meantime, Wallace was picking up similar vibes in the far-flung tropics. Both men pieced together the same puzzle. Species evolve through a process Darwin named natural selection. 3 big takeaways define this process. So let's break it down. Number 1, traits are inherited and are passed down like heirloom jewelry, except with DNA this time. Number 2, there is a mad rush for resources. Too many offspring and not enough food or space for everyone. So competition, big time. Darwin and Wallace both got a light bulb moment after reading the economist Thomas Malthus' talk about populations, human populations. And then thirdly, offspring vary in their traits. Some folks are tall, some have curly hair. Same goes for birds and insects. The variations, the best handle the competition game, get passed along more often. Over generations, that shapes the species little by little. What Darwin called descent with modification. So over here, we have us a picture of Charles Darwin. And then below him, one of Alfred Russel Wallace. And if you look at the 3 main takeaways that define that evolutionary process, where those 2 are the main fathers of, we have as number 1 that traits are inherited. We know we have as 2 the survival of the fittest, and we have a competition for resources, so there's a scarcity of resources, and that the offsprings vary in their traits. And then the variation that best can handle the competition game gets passed along. By 1858, Darwin and Wallace's work was read at the Linnaean Society in London. Then Darwin published his famous On the Origin of Species work in 1859. And in it, he laid out a ton of evidence supporting his work. But let's talk about one of the favorite real-time labs of evolution, the Galapagos finches.